Well, good evening, everyone. I love it. After 4 years, the message has gotten across. It is wonderful to see everyone. I am Ebony Nelson, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as Dean of this wonderful law school. And on behalf of the University of Connecticut School of Law's faculty, staff, students, and alumni, I welcome you all to this very special event titled Never Far From Home, a book talk with attorney Bruce Jackson. I'm honored to extend a special welcome to the Law School Alumni Association Alumni of Color Affinity Group, who is co-hosting tonight's event, as well as to UConn Board of Trustees member, attorney Brian Pollard, author and Microsoft executive Bruce Jackson, and UConn Law alumnus attorney Peter Wilson Jr., who will serve as our moderator this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. Tonight, we will have the pleasure of hearing a discussion of Attorney Jackson's memoir, Never Far From Home, My Journey from Brooklyn to Hip Hop, Microsoft, and the Law, which I found to be powerful, thought-provoking, and inspirational. In it, he chronicles the trials and tribulations of his personal and professional journeys while exhibiting authenticity, self-reflection, vulnerability, perseverance, an incredible work ethic, and an unwavering commitment to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, particularly in the legal profession and in corporate America. Given the recent attacks and challenges to DEI efforts in many segments of our society, I applaud and thank Attorney Jackson for his efforts and dedication to ensuring that equal opportunities are afforded to all. Considering that today marks the first day of Black History Month, we are so truly honored to host him on our campus this evening, and we thank him for being with us. Thank you so much, Attorney Jackson. Attorney Jackson's commitment to opening doors of opportunity for those who have been historically excluded and supporting them once they enter those doors is also shared by our moderator, attorney Peter Wilson Jr., who is an esteemed member of the UConn Law class of 2000. Attorney Wilson, go Huskies, woo! Attorney Wilson has served as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Cravath, Swain and Moore in New York since 2022. Prior to that, he held the same position for 10 years at Proskauer Rose. From 2008 to 2012, Attorney Wilson served as Dave Pitney's Director of Diversity and Legal Recruiting, where he was an associate for 8 years prior to assuming that role. Attorney Wilson has had an exemplary career of developing effective recruitment, retention, and advancement strategies for attorneys historically underrepresented in the legal profession. And he has worked tirelessly to ensure a supportive and inclusive workplace. It's truly an honor to welcome him back home to UConn Law. Thank you so much for being with us, Attorney Wilson. I would also like to thank Alumni Relations Director Jordan Abbott and Assistant to the Dean Chris Shook for all of their hard work in organizing tonight's program. I also thank our events, communications, ITS, and catering staff for their assistance in facilitating the event. Thank you all so much for attending what promises to be a truly inspiring and wonderful evening. Thank you all and welcome.
Thank you, Dean Nelson. That was actually a pretty impressive introduction for me. I felt good about myself when I heard it. Thank you. That was an amazing sort of bring up to the stage a moment for me, and I feel really proud to be back at the school again. UConn Law School was really an important part of my formative years, and it was from here that I really received the training that has allowed me to be able to do the things that I have done in my career. So I am deeply honored to be back here in this capacity. It is somewhat apropos that we're having this discussion today, Bruce, on the first day of Black History Month. And it is really my honor to be able to have an opportunity to interview my colleague and friend, Bruce Jackson, who's sitting here to my left. He has had obviously an incredible career, and I'm going to read some of the highlights of your bio because I think it's important that you sort of understand this gentleman that is sitting here and the things that he's accomplished over his life. It will also create some of the backdrops around the conversation that we're going to have about his book. And so I'm going to start off really by just reading portions of your bio, Bruce, that you have so eloquently allowed me and put in front of me, right? And said, these are the approved remarks for you, Peter. All right, so I'm going to do that. All right. All right. So Bruce is an associate general counsel at Microsoft and managing director for strategic partnerships out of the office of the president at Microsoft. Bruce is involved in the corporation's government affairs and corporate citizenship initiatives. He has also provided legal support for approximately $20 billion of sales of operations in previous roles with the company. Prior to joining Microsoft in 2000 as corporate counsel for the digital media division, Bruce founded the entertainment law firm of Jackson, Brown, Powell, and St. George, representing, and for any younger law school students who are here today, these names may not be familiar to you, but I'm going to tell you they for real in the hip-hop industry. Heavy D, the late, great Heavy D, actually. Pete Rock and CL Smooth. LL Cool J, some of y'all may know that name because he's still doing a lot on the TV and entertainment scene, and Busta Rhymes. He's received Microsoft's Diversity Award, participating in Microsoft's Law and Corporate Affairs diversity efforts. He has helped launch Microsoft's Elevate American Veterans Initiative and worked to develop its diverse recruitment profile. He is a board member of Think 400 and the National Association of Women and Minority-Owned Firms, and the Hip Hop Museum, for y'all who know about the Hip Hop Museum creation that has happened in New York. Never Far From Home is his first book, but I hope, Bruce, this will not be your last. And since we're talking like you may be entering retirement soon, you should have a lot of time to write. And so clearly, Bruce, you've done a lot, right? Throughout your career, you've demonstrated a passion to the DEI and the work that we do around inclusion in the legal profession and in the tech industry. Bruce has a bachelor's degree in accounting from Hofstra University and a JD Tax LLM from Georgetown, where he studied law and tax. Now, your background has really served as the fuel for your commitment to DEI initiatives, and ultimately really has driven you to the height of your career, doing so many different things on the strategic partnership side, and quite frankly, has put you in a position to be a leader at Microsoft. All right, and so your book, Never Far From Home, when I first read it, and I read this book approximately a year ago, was one of the most, in some ways, prolific and heartfelt memoirs that I've read in a long time. Many of the things that you talked about in the book, right, really resonated as me as a young kid who also grew up in New York, right? So my first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book? Why now?
First of all, the book is really our story, right? I just had the opportunity, Simon & Schuster gave it to me, to tell our story. I think the reason I wrote the book, I've been approached several times by some of the old entertainment rappers stating, Bruce, you should write a book. And a few times I declined, but ultimately they approached me again. They said, Bruce, you need to write it. And the reason why they wanted me to write it, because they said, Bruce, you come from our community. You come from the inner city ghetto, so to speak. And we need to have these young people in our community see other things, because typically we'll aspire to be an entertainer or an athlete. And they said, that's what we do, but there are many more opportunities for them. In fact, there are very few entertainers and athletes compared to lawyers and doctors. So we need you to write the book so you can inspire them. So that's the basis of why I wrote the book. But then there's much more than that. I spoke to Brad, who's the vice chairman of Microsoft. I said, I'm about to write this book. He said, well, Bruce, you should write it. And I told him the basis of it, who I'm trying to inspire. And his thing was, you're going to inspire many more people than that. And he's absolutely right? Because you'll be amazed the amount of people from rural America who have approached me and said, I'm inspired by your book. I said, well, you should be, because they have us pinned up against each other, people from rural and urban America, but we should be working together to make sure policies are in place so we all can reach our potential. And I said, in many ways, people in rural America have it worse, because if you think about broadband, if you think about what that does, is the gatekeeper to education, is the gatekeeper to health, is the gatekeeper to training, and they don't have the infrastructure. We have the infrastructure in urban America, but we just can't afford it. So my message now is, hey, it's all about really giving everyone a fair opportunity to reach their potential. But I tell my colleagues from rural America and friends, once you get the opportunity, things change. Because as a black man, I got to deal with racism. You no longer have to deal with that. So I'm going to look for you to be an ally for us on our journey. But my mission now is to try to create an opportunity for all those who do not have opportunity, but also to inspire people who look like me to tell their story. Because oftentimes we're afraid to tell our story because of the consequences that we may be confronted with. So I want to inspire us to tell our story and to go back to our communities, which we don't do, because we're taught once you make it, why you go back. But if we don't go back, we're going to lose another generation. So my philosophy is we need to go back to inspire these young people so they can actually reach their potential and achieve more. So there's a lot of different things that are coming out of the book in terms of why I initially wrote it and what's discovering how I can benefit others who may not even look like me.
And so the book itself really sort of chronicles various stages of your life, right? I want to start at the beginning, right? Let's talk about your childhood, right? And give us some sense of how your childhood formed, right, your reality as an individual who would soon be, right, a top executive at Microsoft.
Yeah, first of all, I was born in Brooklyn, as the book states, in Crown Heights, pre-gentrified Brooklyn. And it was a predominantly African-American community. We were all poor, right? But one of the things when you're poor and you live like that, you don't realize that. And while it is true that you have drug dealers and people who are committing crime in the streets, you'll be amazed. Those are the same people who protect you if they think you're on the right track and say, no, you're not going to do this. What can we do to help you? So we lived there. I was my mother, single-parent household, 6 kids. Father wasn't really around at all. He would pop up on occasions. And then by the time I was 9, we moved to New York City. Not New York, Manhattan, actually. We moved to the projects right across the street from Lincoln Center. So at that point, that's when I realized that I was poor, because I could literally look out my window across the street and I could see wealth. And I'm not talking about middle class, you're talking about upper class. So at that point, I realized it. Now, I would say growing up, did I sell drugs? No. Was it an opportunity to sell drugs? Of course. Those are the things that take place. Rob people, I didn't rob people, but I would be dishonest if I say I didn't steal anything, right? So I can buy clothes, I could help out. So, but those are activities that take place in urban settings. And the reason I said that is because when I speak to the young kids, I can't come to them with a suit and say, work hard and do it. They have to see that I'm them and they are me. I'm their brother, I'm their father. And when they realize that I live that way, they're like, okay, how did you do it? That's when a bell rings. So that's why I told this story of certain things that I did. And many people, even magazine publications, said, why would you do that if you're sitting in the office of vice chairman of Microsoft? That's not what executives do. I said, well, I'm not trying to impress executives. I'm trying to inspire people who need to be inspired. And I would say that, yeah, people look at me differently as a result, right? Even some of my colleagues, they're like, oh, you're one of them. I'm like, yeah, I am one of them, unfortunately. And I wasn't supposed to make it out because the situation is not designed for us to make it out. That's the reality. A lot of people like to say, pull yourself up by the bootstrap. And I'm like, that's not, we don't have the resources or the environment. That's why many of us don't make it out. That's why I'm an exception, and many of us are an exception. And what I tell those people who are privileged, I say, if you think it's that easy, why don't you and your family not just go to the projects for one day and walk around? Why don't you try living there for years, and you'll see how difficult it is. It's not about being smart. Take someone from an affluent area, put them in the inner city, and that kid will struggle. You take a kid from the inner city, put them in the affluent area, that kid will do well. So we know what the solution is. So you have to ask yourself, why has society continued to fail people that way? Urban and rural America. And I think if realizing that, we all should say we should do something about it. It's all about giving people an equal opportunity to be successful. We live in a capitalist society. You're going to have rich and poor. I'm not concerned with that. It's about making sure everyone starts out on the 1 yard line and then compete. We're just in a situation now where people are starting out the 50 and people are starting out at the -1 yard line. So my goal is for everyone just to have the opportunity to be successful.
Well, so let's stick here conceptually of this idea of starting at the 50 as opposed to the 1 yard line, or at some time in arrears, a negative, right? My assumption is that at some point you had influences and others that helped you to be able to see the possibilities in this, right? And so who were the influences for you in that process as you were trying to make those type of decisions about your life, your career, where you wanted to go?
I think that in high school, my high school professor said, you shouldn't even consider college. And he probably was right at that point because I wasn't prepared. Because of what I did, I made a decision because I needed money. I participated in what was known as the co-op program. I worked 1 week, went to school 1 week in one of the poorest schools in New York City. So you could imagine going to school half-time at a poor school. But I did that because that kept me from doing other things. So it was a bad decision academically, but from a social standpoint, it was a great decision because it kept me out of trouble. So when I wanted to go to college, I wasn't prepared. So again, fortunately for me, we had programs, HEOP program, which is designed for students who are academically and financially disadvantaged. And after about 2 weeks going to Hofstra, because I've completed a summer program, after 2 weeks in that summer program, I realized I couldn't do it. So the turning point for me was I had to make 2 calls. One was to my mother. I said, Mom, I can't do this. This is too tough. She said, you sure, baby, you can't? I said, I can't. And my mother said, come home. Not because she wanted me to come home, because she saw her baby boy hurting. And she said, come home then if that's the case. But then I had to call the big boss, which is my aunt.
Okay, everybody got an aunt.
And my aunt essentially said, I already heard you want to come home, but what do you want to come home to? You want to come home and live in the projects? And my mind was made up. I said, maybe. So I thought I was saying something. So maybe. She said, well, do you want to go and work for Chase Manhattan Bank, which was the job you had in high school, making copies in the basement? I said, maybe. So I'm standing up to it.
Right.
And then she said, you're not coming home. She went on to say, because your mother, your grandmother, and myself picked cotton in South Carolina and couldn't look white people in the face. And we had to address them, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. She said, no one in the Jackson family ever graduated. You're not coming home. And she hung up the phone. So at that point, I was more afraid to come home than to stay and deal with the challenges. So you may say, well, Bruce, you weren't prepared. How did you get through it? One, it was, I learned about Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there's no progress in college the first time. And I knew what that meant. I said, this is going to hurt. It's going to be painful, but you can do it. And then there's the Longfellow poem, right, that talks about the height reached by great men were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards during the night. So that's just working people, outworking people. And my first year at Hofstra, I had 2 Caucasian roommates, not smarter, but much better prepared, went to private schools. And they would go out all night, almost every night. And they would come back 1 o'clock, where was Bruce? At the desk. And they would laugh and say, why are you here? And I didn't tell them, but in my mind, I said, I have to catch up to you because you had a head start. And I didn't want to tell them that because, in law school, people tell you they don't study when they're studying all the time because they want to exceed. They want to exceed you. So I just played that game in college, right? So that was the beginning of it. And that's what I did. Is I used those two principles throughout my entire life. Even when I got to Microsoft, I said, okay, some of these people understand technology, but I'm going to outwork them and I'll catch them. And that's been my philosophy. If you outwork people and you give yourself, you're patient with yourself, you can achieve anything you want to achieve.
Well, I'm going to take a couple more quotes that I got from your book. They were simple ones, but they resonate for me. Long-term development over short-term comfort, right? There are no shortcuts. You need to work your butt off, right? That was something, quite frankly, my mom used to say to me all the time. And so we currently are on a law school campus, a lot of individuals who are thriving to be able to achieve, right, the heights of their careers, right? They want to maintain optionality as they are growing up and to be able to create various offshoots for their own career paths, right? And this concept of resilience, right, in the face of difficulty is something you talk a lot about in your book, right? What advice do you have for the younger professionals right now who are thinking about what next step they take? How do they do this?
Yeah,
right?
I think in terms of resilience, to me, it's like there was no room for me to fail, right? So I think, and there's no room for you to fail. There was a lot of people counting on me back then, and I would say proudly, my grandmother didn't really see me graduate from college, but there's been several Jacksons graduating from college since I graduated, so it's done. And there's a lot of people that's counting on and relying on me today. So failure is just not an option, right? I would say follow your passion, right? A lot of people like to say, even entertainment law, don't get into entertainment law. Get into whatever you're passionate about and pursue that, right? And what choice do you have if you're not successful? That was always my motivating factor. What are my choices? And just work hard, and you can overcome anything, right? And it's not just for you, right? It's for the next generation of your family members, right? People always say, Bruce, you're working hard. They said, what is it about? I said, no, it's about generational wealth for my daughters. Someone just asked me today, how are your kids? I said, my kids, fortunately, are privileged. And we never had discussions about school, future, money. That's what I live for, right? For my kids, but also to make sure that other people are doing the same thing. I think when it comes to just generational wealth for minorities, I think when it comes to education, diversity, I think we all have an obligation to lift one another up. And not just minorities, right? I think we all do. So I think if you're a student, follow your passion. And if you're passionate and you like something, you have to like what you do if this is going to be a career. Because I think being a lawyer is a grind at times.
Right.
And I'm just being honest with you. In fact, when my kids decided not to do it, I said, good. Because I missed out. And it cost me. Working hard has cost me personally. Been divorced once, and I'll say because of me, and my priority was just work. Relationships damaged because of me. There's a price you pay. So I tell people now, just try to balance that, because I have regrets, right? Because I kind of ruined other people's life because I was just so focused on one thing.
Yeah. So in light of this being the start of Black History Month, I want to transition a little bit to talk about sort of your identity as a Black man, right? Because you engage in a variety of different sort of conversations in the book about this, how it played out in your career and your life, how it has informed the way that you look at the world. Can you give me some idea from your perspective how the idea of being a black man in America has informed your career trajectory and your path, right? The ways that you see yourself as a leader and how you choose to lead others.
I think one, just writing a book, right? To me, it's all about trying to inspire, like I said, my people, right? I think as a black man, just some of the obstacles. I mean, just talk about some of the obstacles that we really have to deal with. And in fact, I'll tell you, it's about really giving people proximity to what it's like. If you give people proximity, they have empathy, and they'll want to support you. And you may say, well, Bruce, what do you mean? I got arrested twice as a Microsoft attorney and spent the night in jail. And people said, do you expect that to happen again? I said, well, I live in New York. If it happens again, yeah, I would not be surprised. But when I explained that to Microsoft and to my colleagues, they said, well, and that takes courage, but I did it intentionally. And when I told the story to them, just saying, I know a friend of mine got arrested. And then I ended by saying, well, that really happened to me. And everyone's mouth dropped. And of course, it starts spreading around the company. But that was intentional. Like, I'm ready to be vulnerable if it's going to help my people, right? Because at that point, I'm like, what can they really do to me? But I just want, because I realize you got people in a bucket who are interested in helping others. You got people who are curious, and you got people who just don't care. I don't waste my time with people who don't care. And I'm pretty quick to determine people in that third bucket, because it's a waste of energy. And people who are trying to learn, I may give you some attention, but I only got so much time and really focusing on those who want to help. And so when I did that, told that story, they said, okay, Bruce, you know what? We didn't realize that happened to black people, period. And I said, yeah, I can close billion-dollar deals. I'm capable and have done it at Microsoft, like you. However, when I leave this office, and I tell them, because people need to be informed, you live your privileged life, and I live a life as a black man in America, which is totally different. No one's asking me where I went to school, when I walk throughout Brooklyn, how much money I have at a bank, who I work for. People have stereotypes, right? And they act upon their stereotypes and prejudice. So I think that we just have to stand up, and that's my philosophy, stand up and tell the truth and the story, even to Microsoft. I mean, I'm out here, we were talking earlier, he said, damn, you've been on this book tour for a while. I said, yeah, I have been. Microsoft is supportive of it. If they weren't, I would still do it, because I think it's an obligation that we have, right? And I certainly have that obligation. If you talk to Brad, he would say, yeah, Bruce is going to do what he thinks is right, particularly around this topic. And I think we all should. And I'm trying to set an example and say, if I can do it at a company like Microsoft, write a book, share all this stuff, and there may be some negative consequences, but there'll be some positive impact that's being made to people who need to hear it. That's all that really counts. I think we all have to do that, stand up and tell our story. And we all have the same story. Some of us sitting there saying, well, not me, because you don't want to say it publicly, but I know you have an Uncle Henry, Aunt T. We know we have similar stories. We just need to share it and go back to the community so we can inspire young people.
All right, so I'm going to stay right there, right? Because there's a quote, right? I'm glad you kind of led me to this moment, right? There's a quote in the book that I found particularly important. And then we're going to go back to this arrest thing, because I actually want you to talk about the arrest story after you close the deal, because that was, to me, it was heart-wrenching, but I was like, this is so the reality, right? I felt it because I had been on a stop by the cops many times, actually. But I'm going to read this quote. If you're uncomfortable with who you want to pretend it never happened. But as far as I'm concerned, everything I've accomplished grew from the roots of the city and the projects and distressed neighborhoods that raised me. The houses, and we're talking about the Amsterdam houses, are no less a part of me than the blood that flows through my veins. Now, this goes directly to your point, right, around sort of acknowledgement and the ability of individuals to tell their own story, right? to give it some agency right now. Why is that so important to you that the houses is part of your DNA at all times?
It is. It's where I come from. Part of the book, too, is I went back and lived in the projects. As an attorney representing the rap artists that we talked about earlier, the first thing that happened, I was working for a predominant tax firm in D.C., making probably $70,000, and that's not a lot now, but in '88, it was a lot of money for an attorney to make. And I made the decision I wanted to practice entertainment law. And so to do that, it was in New York, and it was an internship where he was only paying me $6,000 a year. So the first thing I did, I called my mom. I said, Mom, I got to come home. She said, come home? She said, you want to come back and live in the projects? I said, yeah, it's the only way this is going to work financially. I have to live in the projects because I don't have to pay rent. You're paying the rent, Mom, with the food stamps and the government subsidies you're getting. So, and I went back, right? And I was pretty comfortable going back that time. And then I went back again after I got divorced, living in Westchester. The first place I went to, and people say, why? I went back home to the projects, and people say, why? I said, if you've been through a divorce, it's a painful ordeal, and there's nothing more comfortable than to go back and live with Mom, regardless of where she is. So I went back, and I lived there. So I go back because I have friends and family there. In fact, I spent the night there maybe 3 weeks ago with a friend's house because I didn't want to go back to Jersey where I live. So I'm comfortable there, and I'm constantly trying to just to inspire people. Like, come on, that's who I am, right? Just because I work for Microsoft, it doesn't really take away from who I am and the people I know and the people who raised me and who looked out for me. So I have an obligation to look out for them, but particularly the next generation.
All right, so now let's talk about this story of the arrest, right? I'm gonna let you just explain it in your own words, right? After you've closed a major deal, right? You're sort of leaving the houses at the time, right? And lights start to flash in your rearview mirror, all right? I'm gonna let you take it from there.
Yeah, so essentially, whenever you close a big deal, I think at that point, it was a $100 million deal that I was involved in. We closed it, celebration at the office. So the first thing I want to do, I said, I'm going to go celebrate in the office. I'm going to go back to the projects where I was living at the time. And I said, I'm going to celebrate with my friends. So we went to 125th Street, to be quite honest with you, bought some crabs and some beer. And by the time I drove back down to the projects, right as I was pulling up the hill on 61st Street, the cops pulled me over and said, can we see your license? And of course, I was with someone I grew up, a young lady in the projects. And the first thing she started to go off, essentially, on the cops. And he said, hey, if you don't shut her up, we're going to take her in. So eventually I told her, listen, I think they're going to take me in because I've been around this enough. Why don't you just take the car and take the crabs, but don't eat them all because I'm coming out. If not tonight, I'm coming out tomorrow morning. I know the protocol, and I did come out the next morning. So they put me through the system, right? And if you've been arrested, you know you go through several different precincts, but eventually land up at central booking. And I'm a little claustrophobic, so I was like, God, how am I going to get through this? So I eventually said, put me in a cell with the phone. And he said, hey, this all, everyone's on the floor, it's crowded. And I said, I can survive that. Just put me in a cell. So ultimately, of course, you have no rights once you actually get arrested. They don't care who you are. They said, no, we're putting you in the cell in the back by yourself. And so I had to spend the entire evening. So ultimately, they said my brother had a ticket. It should have been a disappearance ticket. But again, I had a nice car because I was still working for Microsoft. In fact, I had a BMW. And so I was being profiled. Like, what is this guy doing? So I had to spend the night in jail because my brother got a ticket. And that's it. And it happened again separately. But more importantly, even at 10 years old, I think that's one of the turning points is when we moved from Brooklyn to Manhattan, one of the things that my mother did immediately was to teach us all how to travel back individually by train to see our family. And so I made the trips probably a dozen times by myself, but this one time, made the trip, took the express train to Brooklyn, had to go and step over and take the local train. And so when I got on the platform, the cop said, Caucasian man said, "That's him." And I heard it, but you ignore stuff if you're in New York, because they could be anyone. And they said it again. I look, and they looked at me, and the cops start walking in my direction. The Caucasian man said, "Get him." And so at that point, I had nowhere to run. I couldn't run up the platform because they were blocking it, so I had to jump on the track. So the train was not moving at that point, so I jumped on the track, stepped over the third rail, and if you know how the system works, there's a ledge in between the tracks. So I ran from that station to the next station, but boom, they were there waiting for me. And they took me to the precinct, and they ultimately stated, "Well, you robbed someone on the train." And of course, I'm crying because I'm 10 years old, and people say, "Why did you run?" I'm 10 years old. And he said, "Well, why don't you say you did it? And if you did it, you get to go home." And the reason I put that in the book is because that still happens today. The Central Park Five, if you recall that, that's a prime example of that happening. In fact, one of the victims of the Central Park Five just got stopped by the police, and that was all over the news recently. So I put that in the book so people can realize that still happens today. And so when my mother kept calling back about 2 weeks, they finally said, "We arrest the person who did it." There was no apology for that. But had I admitted to it, and I came very close to saying I did it if the passage was I'll get to go home. But for some reason, I can't tell you why I was crying, I just continued to say I didn't do it. But the message behind that is when someone runs, they're not guilty. And that's the first thing we think. He ran, he's guilty. He's black and he ran, he's definitely guilty. I was scared. And people run because they're afraid. And that's the message I want to get to people, particularly legislators and judges and attorneys, prosecutors, so they can realize running is not a sign of guilt. I was scared. And I could have said, I did it. And that's not guilt. I could have said I did it because I'm 10 years old and I want to go home. So that's the kind of the message I really want to get out there for people to hear and see. This happens today.
But, and that is so critically important, right, to continue to highlight, right, the injustices that can happen on a day-to-day. In the D&I space, sometimes we call these sometimes simple slights as micro messages, micro messages. But what I found particularly important about your story, at least as it relates to your arrest as you were an adult, was that you got out, you got on a train, you went back home, you got dressed, and then you went right back to work. And in that moment, right, there's this strange dichotomy, right, that I'm an executive, that I can close $1 million deals, and I can get arrested for driving my car at the exact same time, right, which goes back to the story you were trying to say. And the reality of that is the vulnerability right now that when we talk about the stories that happen at the kitchen tables all the time for young children of color, that I think is critically important for people to just discuss and have open conversations about, right? For you to open yourself up to that, right? Because clearly not everyone knew that story. I did not know that story about you until I read your book, right? What has that done to be able to sort of release some of these things for you, to talk about them openly, to be able to have this circuit and an audience to constantly be able to talk about the things that you find critically important around inclusion and diversity and equity in our society?
I think one, to me, it's really about people understanding the struggle, right? And the challenges that we go through every day of our lives. Just to get here is a struggle, but the struggle doesn't stop here. It's a continuous struggle. I stated earlier, if I get arrested again, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I just have a Rolodex. I'll call someone to come pick me up. But it's a reality in the society in which we live. So I think talking about it to the audience, And the audience that I have the opportunity to speak to, I think is great because it gives people a different insight. Because hopefully look at me as, yeah, I'm sitting in the office of the vice chairman of one of the top 5 companies in the world. And I'm telling you that I've been victimized, and it can certainly happen again. And we need to do something about it. And I shouldn't be here because I was born in a situation where I don't have the resources. We should do something about that. And I'm saying, because I got foresight just talking to people in rural America, why are we fighting one another when we both have been dealt a bad hand? We should be working together to make sure that we all have at least the opportunity to compete.
All right, so we can focus just now a little bit. I'm looking at the time that we have on what I would say is sort of your lessons and legacy, right? What are the messages that you would like to get across right now to the audience about not only your book, but your journey at this point in your career, right? And so as we were jokingly talking about you soon to be thinking about retirement, right? I know that you're kind of thinking about your legacy, right? What do you want that to be?
I think it's about helping people. I think D&I is definitely the key and that will be a part of my legacy, and just try to show people that they should do and they have to do more. There's an obligation. One of the things I tell people, not to even brag about it, when I supported a $20 billion business at Microsoft, I had a team of 15 women, 7 were black, 3 black males, 2 Asian males, 2 Latino males, and 2 Caucasian males. That was the makeup of the team. It was not intended to exclude anyone. It was just that I told my team, and I didn't make the decision, I said, listen, we got to give everyone an equal opportunity to get a job, and I want to make sure that there's a woman and minority on all the slates. And they got it, and they just hired the best candidates. That's when you do it. So things like that to show people that it can be done. Because I got calls internally and externally saying, Bruce, your team's not going to hire another minority, are you? Because they're watching you. I said, well, they were watching me when I was the 3rd attorney hired at Microsoft in 2000. So if they're watching me, let them keep watching me. What can they possibly do? So I said, I'm doing it and I'm glad the team was structured that way, because it sends a message to not just people outside of Microsoft, but inside of Microsoft. Because when I joined Microsoft in 2000, Microsoft was not very diverse. I just said I was the 3rd attorney hired in 2000. And when I was in Seattle, Seattle wasn't very diverse, which is why I left after 2 years. And I told Brad why I'm leaving, and he said, I get it. And I give him credit. I said, Brad, there are no black people in Seattle or Microsoft. I said, so I'm leaving. I'm quitting. He said, let's see if we can get you back to New York. So he did. And that's when he said, we're going to try to make Microsoft different. So when he said that, I just used that to say, okay, I'm going to play my part to make Microsoft more diverse. Not just internally with the teams that I had. Hopefully other people would see it and they'll start repeating that. And also when it came time to hiring outside vendors, I made sure that when I approached a firm, I would say, I got this bucket of money. Women and minorities need to work on this matter. And if you don't want it, I'll go somewhere else. But oftentimes they'll say, I get it. And they'll do it, right? Because we talk about E&I, and I think you talk about all these firms, that they're engaged in a host of activities around diversity. Even institutions, even academic institutions. But it's all about results. Take a step back, later for what people tell you, take a step back and look at the leadership. And look at the leadership's leadership team and see how many women or people of color there. That's the message, not all these activities. It's noise. Activities, noise, and a distraction from real impact. So I always start from the point of, don't tell me all these great things you think you're doing. Why are you doing it? You're doing it for an impact. Tell me your impact. And if you have real impact, then let's talk about the activities. and I'll be your number one advocate. But let's start from impact. But I think we have a problem. And the legal profession is probably one of the worst. But there's a problem. But not just the legal profession, corporate America is not as diverse as it should be at all. And don't let anyone tell you anything different. The first thing you should do is look at the leaderships of these various organizations. And you'll see, like I have, that there's been some progress, but it's a lot more work left to be done.
So you obviously raise a huge issue, right? But you also have the benefit of, through your career, being able to demonstrate value and impact, right, through diversity and inclusion. For individuals right now who are trying to do the same thing, thinking about how they can advance their own careers and make the type of impact that you have made, what would you say is the single thing that they should be doing?
I think one of the things that's extremely helpful is having a sponsor, right? And a sponsor is just someone who has influence in any organization you're in. I haven't really told people up until recently that Brad's my sponsor. And I joked around, and Brad's from Appleton, Milwaukee. So I joked around with someone when they talk about a second book. I said, maybe the second book should be the man from Appleton, Milwaukee meets the guy from the ghetto in Brooklyn. But you need a sponsor. And so your question may be like, Bruce, that sounds great, but how do you get a sponsor? Well, I'll tell you one of the things I used to do with Brad. Whenever he comes to New York, he would say, where's Bruce? And people know he's looking for you. So I know. He was like, how are you doing? What's going on? So I said, let me just start having some canned talks in my pocket, because I can't say the normal thing, right? You want to leave an impression. Like I tell people all the time, when you think you're going to meet someone important, just don't shake their hands. They're going to forget. It's okay if you know you're going to meet someone that you practice 2-3 weeks before what you're going to say. And look at what some of their priorities are, some of their goals are, and make a comment about that. Because they'll leave and say, that young lady, that young man made an interesting comment, right? And that's what you want to do. That's because a sponsor, you have to earn their support. A mentor, you can go ask people, can you show me how I can maneuver within this organization? But a sponsor is someone in the room, and I've been in a closed room, and you could put your head down and work extremely hard. Sometimes people say, just work hard and you'll get to the top. I've been in some of these rooms, and if you don't have the right sponsor, someone's mentioning your name, you're going to see someone else in your organization get a certain job or a certain opportunity. You're going to ask yourself, why? I work harder than them, smarter than them. Well, they had a sponsor. Everyone I talk to in corporate America, different companies, Fortune 500 companies, particularly GCs, they'll say, Bruce, you're right. I had a sponsor, which is why I'm here. All of them that I spoke to. So don't let people tell you that just working hard is the answer. It's part of it. But when we have these closed door meetings, you need someone to mention your name when there's an opportunity that's available. And you say, well, why don't you give the opportunity to Peter? I think Peter's been working hard. I think he can do that. If they don't say that, I don't care how hard Peter's working, he's not getting it. Someone else is. So I would say, treat your career strategically. Microsoft's not the top 5 companies for the last 3 decades accidentally. It's strategic. So treat your career strategically. And when you have an opportunity, and figure out the landscape of the organization you're in and find out who the influential people are. And it doesn't have to be a vertical person. It could be someone in a different part of the organization who has influence. And it could be your colleague. Peter could be someone I would use because Peter has a sponsor. So don't overlook that as well. Just be strategic with it and see how you can get your voice heard or mentioned by a sponsor.
So you wrote about in the book being raised and you wrote about sort of being raised in an environment that rewards toughness and brutalizes the weak, right? And going through, in my career, I certainly can say that the legal profession can be a tough profession, right? It is a profession that sometimes can feel unforgiving, and you have to exhibit a clear understanding of your own value at all times. So what advice do you have for folks to maintain that grit, that resilience in a career? You've been at Microsoft, what, 24 years, right? In a career that can span 24 years, what gives you the mental toughness? Obviously, for you, you may go back to where you were born, where you were raised. But there are other things that are innate in that process for you. What gives you that, and what do you think others should be focusing on for their own careers?
Yeah, I think you're right. The legal profession is a tough profession. Being at Microsoft, I think one of the things really is believing in yourself, because you're going to get beat down. There's going to be a lot of people questioning you. People question me. In fact, I would say when I first started at Microsoft in 2000, my manager would always come to me and say, "Are you comfortable?" Because the people I gave advice to, in fact, we built the Windows Media Player that competed. You all may not know what that is, but the Windows Media Player was in competition with the real player. So Microsoft created the Windows Media Player. So that's the team I was a part of. And so everyone was white. And I'm giving advice to them. So she would come to me and say, "Bruce, are you comfortable?" And I said, "Don't ask me that question." I said, "I've been around white people all my life. I'm comfortable around white people. You should ask them whether they're comfortable, because they have the option." And many of them never been around someone like me and giving them advice. So I think, yeah, you can be in those environments, you could fold. You just got to just believe, really, in yourself, right? If you get somebody else at the organization that would cheer you along and encourage you, great. But I think at the end of the day, you got to believe in yourself and your skills and your potential. Because this is not a friendly place. It's not a friendly world. I tell my kids that all the time. I say, no, I'm tough on you, because this is practice for when you leave and you do your own thing. But the key to me is really just believing in yourself. And what choice do you have? What's the choice? If it doesn't work, what's your choice? What's your option? So make it work. People are not smarter than you. Even at Microsoft, I say all the time, the delta between one attorney and another is so small. And so why do some people get the opportunity and others don't? It's not that big. It's not a big gap like that. So I would say, one, network. Make sure you focus on a sponsor. Have all your key tools prepared when you meet someone who's influential. But at the end of the day, you got to believe in yourself. And you have to want to do it for, sometimes, in my case, more than just me. This is not about me at this point in my career. It's about others, right? And try to show people examples and give them the courage to move forward.
All right, so I'm going to ask my last question, right? And then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. You got a fantastic book, right? We're giving out some copies today, right? I'm not sure if everybody got a copy, but we want people to get copies for their friends, right? And more copies of your book. So what would you say is the reason why you want folks to buy the book? What are the things they're going to get from it, right, that leave them wanting more from you and, quite frankly, feeling connected to their own reality?
I think people get a lot of different things from the book, but I think most importantly is inspiration, right? That if I can do it, coming from where I came from and the challenges and obstacles, which will align to many of your challenges and obstacles, whether you're from rural or urban America. It'll give you the courage, the inspiration to push forward. It'll give you the inspiration to bring others along with you, to reach back. That's kind of what I'm looking for, to inspire you for you to basically go back and to inspire others. Because you're all in the place now of privilege. And there's just a lot of people out there who just don't know what it looks like. So go back to wherever you come from, whether it's rural or urban. There's an obligation to try to bring people along, because we didn't get here alone. People help us get to where we are. So that's what I want. I just want people to really to be inspired themselves and to be inspired enough to go back and help those who are uninspired. Because there's a lot of folks out there. I shouldn't be here at all. At all. My kids should be where they are, but I shouldn't be here. So it's a gift from God that I'm here. So I think God is saying, hey, now you need to inspire people. Because everything I gave you materially, that's my belief. It's not all yours. Some of the stuff I gave it to you so you can give to other people to help them out. And I do that because I don't want God to stop giving me.
All right, Bruce, thank you very much. But I'm going to open it up for questions generally from the floor. I believe we have mics out on the floor if anyone has any questions. But thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, you don't got to be shy. I don't bite. I'm going to give you an honest answer.
Hi there. Is this on? My name is Meredith O'Keefe. I'm an alum of UConn Law School. I really enjoyed your book. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for being here tonight. You've really given us some ideas and really led by example in terms of personal actions, right, that we can take, and maybe assuming that everyone in this room is in the bucket of wanting to rise to the occasion, right, and lift each other up. Are there other either personal actions you'd like to see in the world? You talked about mentorship in the book. You talk about sponsorship. You talk about going out and talking with young people, right, and showing them. Are there either, in addition to that, other personal actions or changes you'd like to see on a policy level just to try to make this world a better place and address some of the gross inequities?
I think what you said, I think all of that, I think from the policy, I think you're right. One of the things that I'm even excited about is just the people from rural America. They'll email me from around the country and say, hey, how can we work together? I think that's an opportunity, right, to bridge this whole divide that's based on ignorance, if you ask me, right, to work together with a bigger group, right, instead of dividing us, because you divide people, you conquer them, right, so to work together and realize that we have similar challenges, because I think if we work together, we probably can get more things done, right, so to me, that's kind of something that I'm excited. Like, okay, let's work together, right? Let's figure out how we can get the resources in your community and the resources in my community. And you know what? Let's compete after that. Let's compete with everyone else. Because think about it. Why is it that way in rural and urban America? And why does it continue to be that way? When I speak to people in rural, they say, I made it out, but most of my family's still there. You speak to people in urban, it's the same thing. Because the resources are not there, right? So, and it's no secret, I'm not the smartest person in the world that sees that and no one else. So let's try to fix that. But that's going to take some time because there'll be several reasons why it's like that. So I think that while that happens, let's try to inspire as many people in those communities as we can so we don't lose another generation.
Good evening, and thank you both, and certainly thank UConn Law School for having the insight, foresight, and courage to bring these discussions to the forefront as we need to have them. I'm listening to you and I've read the book with a great deal of interest and almost antsiness about, and it may be somewhat rhetorical thinking, can we really get to where you are inspiring us to go, attempting to inspire us to go? And I ask that because the divide, as you speak of it, ignorant or not, is a sustained one. And we've gone through many iterations of these efforts, from affirmative action to cultural competency to diversity itself. And now we're under the banner of DEI. And yet we have that sustained ignorance,
Right.
so to speak. And so I guess with, I'm an optimist by nature, but with a bit of pessimism in my question, can we really get to this place?
I'm an optimist too. I think we have to, right? At some point, everything changes. Nothing stays the same, right? It's just going to take time, right? So I have to be optimistic and believe. If I'm not optimistic and believe, what am I here for? So no, I think we'll get there at some point. When? I don't know, which is why I said we should take everything we have and go back to our community to inspire the next generation, because I think that's a long haul. We should work on that. But I think if we just continue to work on that, we'll continue to have people being left behind. So we need to individually go back to our community to inspire people in addition to working to that. And I like to thank UConn for inviting me as well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have to have courage. There's some people who said, companies that I know, GC, said, you know what, I don't know if my company's ready for you. And that's real, right? Some people have to have the courage. They're like, we're not quite there on the diversity track. I'm not sure if I'm bold enough to bring you there, to have this discussion. They weren't bold enough to do it because of the environment that they work in. So no, I do thank you for inviting me and having this discussion.
Thank you, and I will read your book. I haven't read it yet, but I will read it. I do have a question, though, and I thank the Dean and UConn Law. I'm an alum here. I do have a question, because in academia, diversity is under attack now, you know, and I'm an optimism. I have optimism. I've worked in diversity, you know, for many years, but how do we, so there's an individual one-on-one that we continue to do, but there's also this systemic piece that I'm really concerned about, and you're a wonderful person to talk about that as well, because without academia and the ability to do that, we're at a loss.
No, we're at a critical stage in the country, right? No, I think you're absolutely right. There's some major challenges now. It may even get worse later. But it's not just academia, because what's happening is, in corporate America and the private sector, those who are disinterested in using the rulings in academia to now do what they didn't want to do to begin with, right? Because even in private sector, what they can do is really just tweak it a little bit and be able to be in compliance. But a lot of them don't even want to go that far. Say, I don't want to get sued, or things of that nature. So no, we're in a bad time. So companies who are committed have to stand up. And that's why I said, look at what they not say, but look at the organization. But I think it's going to take time, right? Because we're not heading in the right direction now. We're heading in a pretty bad direction, particularly with all these lawsuits going on. Companies are, law firms too, are, I don't know if that's what they do. They litigate for a living. So for them to tell me they're scared, I'm like, okay, you just don't want to do it. And all you have to do is tweak your programs and continue to do what you're doing. So I think it's a bad place, right? We'll get to see who's committed and who's not committed.
Yeah, I love your idea of sponsors and that idea of how do you spread that a little further. It's not easy to do.
No, it's not.
Right, so any thoughts on that for, you know, how do you do that in a lot of areas, but particularly in academia right now, because that's really under attack. You know, there are a lot of areas
Yeah, academia, I'm surprised at some of the stuff that's taking place, to be honest with you. I'm just surprised. Um, no, go. You're right. Like, well, one of the things we have to first find out how many companies are real post George Floyd. I mean, it's an issue, right? Companies are not where they were during George Floyd time, right? Now, companies themselves are not really talking diversity as much. So it's not just in academia, it's corporate America and law firm. That discussion is not being had. When I speak to my other colleagues and companies, they're like, it's not a priority anymore right now. And that may shift. It was a moment in time with George Floyd. We were talking about it. Companies hiring diversity leads, and now what they're doing is letting some of them go, redeploying them, and having them do something else. So we're at a different time. But we got to continue to fight, right? If you don't fight, it just gets worse. So you have to continue to fight. You can't give up. Can't surrender at this point. But I do see it potentially can get worse.
Bruce, I would actually add, I mean, the thing that gives me the most hope in this is sort of this next generation of professional that is coming into the landscape right now. They are motivated, they're interested, and demanding that organizations do better. Now, the truth is that in order for this to work, we need people, right? We need individuals that make demands about what kind of environments they want to work in, the colleagues they want to be next to. And so, for me, everybody has to just find their why. Like, why do we do this? Why is it important to me? Why do I stand up, right? Why do I sort of not be an acquiescent bystander in all of this? You got to ask that question. And I've been doing DEI work now for, 15 or so years, directly doing DEI work. And it really got crystallized to me when I had my daughter. And to see this young black girl, right, who has so much potential and opportunity, right? I work now to make sure that the world is ready for her, right? That's my why today. And so everyone has got to figure out their why and then stick to that, right? Because that will help to motivate you during darker times. Because right now we are in a time where it seems bleak in a lot of ways. And so that requires a level of resilience in this that you absolutely have to be able to fall back on your why. But that's for me.
I just want to echo what everyone said here and thank the school for putting this event together. I did just have a question, echoing what everyone else has been saying. As you've talked about, the landscape is looking bleak, but I am an optimist, and when I look at my peers and I'm just inspired by a lot of the things that we're talking about and the conversations we're having about making impact in the near future. So as future attorneys that are entering this bleak landscape, what are some opportunities or, experiences you would suggest that we start seeking out now to prepare us to go into the world and have an actual impact, as opposed to simply making noise like a lot of these companies are doing with their DE&I initiatives?
I mean, one of the things I always tell young attorneys, just practice being a good attorney first, right? Do that, and you could also fight. But I also agree with what Peter said. I think the young folks, like you all, will change, right? And you have a totally different perspective, even on D&I. Whether you're white, black, I got a call from someone, Caucasian person going to school in California, said, "Hey, Bruce, they have people sign these petitions. I want to fight." And she said, "I'm going to get all my Caucasian friends to come and want to fight," to your point. And I spoke to her father today. He said, "Bruce, I didn't think I raised an activist, but she's passionate about this stuff." So you're right. I think the young people are they're changing, but that's like a generation. So that's almost waiting for the generation. I think you should continue to fight, right? But practice being good at your skill first. And I think we got to just go back, and I think we got to fight. Yeah, I can be pessimistic because it doesn't look great right now, but we just can't cave into it, right? And we have to really rely on the young folks, and I think you all will change, but that's some time away, right? Before you're in power to really make the change. So just be good at what you do. Be valuable to yourself and others, and that's the influence that you will have to help facilitate change.